continue to come into focus. There are big questions about what could happen to mixed status families, as they're called, if those mass deportations are carried out. A mixed status family, that means some family members are undocumented while others are U.S. citizens. Well, the American Immigration Council, a pro-immigration advocacy group, estimates up to 4 million mixed status families could be separated. Now, mass deportations, of course, became one of Mr. Trump's biggest campaign promises. It's still unclear exactly how those deportations will be carried out and how families will be impacted. But we're getting some information. And we have NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joining us with her latest reporting here. Julia, good morning. So you've reported exclusively this month on a bunch of this stuff here, but that the Trump transition team specifically is eyeing new detention centers near major U.S. cities, with the goal being to hold double the amount of migrants awaiting deportation after their arrests inside the U.S. Walk us through exactly what that means. Double what? What is that number? What does that mean we might see? Are we getting a clearer image of how this is going to go down?
Right. So right now, the Congress has given ICE the ability to be able to hold 41,000 immigrants in ICE detention at one time. That doesn't mean that they can't deport more, because it's a place where they hold them before they are deported. And right now, a lot of that space is being used for migrants who have just crossed the border, they're detained, and then released later for a court date. This would use those beds in the opposite direction and double them up to 80,000. And honestly, Savannah, since that reporting, I've heard the number could be even higher. And they're in talks with private prison companies to figure out what they can do to get the most amount of beds online soon. That might mean building temporary facilities or soft-sided facilities. They've used this in the past along the border when there's an influx in order to get as many people in beds as possible. This would be for migrants who are living in the United States and are arrested and are being held before their deportation flights.
So, Julia, given what we know, I just used that term mixed status family. So some family members, U.S. citizens, others undocumented. Are we hearing what those types of people, what those groups of people are doing to plan for this?
And this is where I have to give credit to Dee Martinez, who wrote this amazing story over the weekend. I can report on these details, but Dee really gets to the heart of this. She interviewed a family, and there are many like them. We understand up to 4 million across the country that could be separated. This family she talked to in Pennsylvania is preparing for the possibility that the husband, the father of these children, could be deported. And so the mother is busy getting her children's passports. As you know, you have to have 2 parents present to get a child's passport. They're doing things like getting power of attorney. And some households, we're told, where both parents could be deported but the children are U.S. citizens, they're putting together packets with adult contacts, where to find the nearest family member if they come home from school to an empty home. Savannah.
Julia, walk us through any legal challenges that could play out once President-elect Trump is in office, and if we do start to see these mass deportations take place.
Well, there are many being prepared quietly in the background. We saw just last week the ACLU filed for freedom of information to try to get more information about what the Trump transition team is going to use for their flights when they start doing these deportations. We can expect that they're going to be very closely looking at how Trump tries to go about this. If he does enact an old law from the 1700s that would constitute immigration in the United States as an alien invasion from a foreign power, they'll very quickly challenge that, saying that's unconstitutional because clearly these migrants are not coming on behalf of a foreign government, that would be a real stretch for the Trump team to try to make that argument. They'll also look at other things, like if there are ways they go about this when they want to invoke the military, anytime that they want to push anyone back to a country that is not their own. We've seen the previous Trump administration try that in the past, take nationalities and send them to a country like Guatemala, even though if they're not from Guatemala. There are a number of ways they'll challenge it. Whether or not they can just deport someone or challenge someone just for deporting them, that seems like more of a stretch. But it's the way they'll go about it. They'll find ways to challenge it in court.
Julia Ainsley, fabulous reporting as always. Thank you very much. For more, we are joined on set by NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Great to have you with us. So I want to start with these confirmation processes and what might happen here. There's some bipartisan criticism of some of these picks, but walk us through exactly what would need to happen for any of them to be held up. I mean, how much power could Democrats, for example, really have to hold any of this up?
Right. The confirmation process requires a simple majority in the U.S. Senate, and there's currently going to be 53 Republican senators. So theoretically, if you're looking to get confirmed, you could lose the support of every Democrat and then 3 Republican senators. But there's several of these individuals, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell included, who may be roadblocks to some of these nominees. It's in large part why we saw Matt Gaetz, the attorney general picked by Donald Trump, ultimately take his name out of the running out of concerns that he wasn't going to be able to get those 51 votes. And if you were a Pete Hegseth or a Tulsi Gabbard or even a RFK, right, that is where some of the concern is, in some cases, bipartisan. And, you may, though, also like the labor secretary pick that Donald Trump put forward, may actually have the support of some Democrats, but not Republicans. So this is a really interesting math game here that we're going to be watching play out here for these next 2 months.
As we prepare to head into the confirmation stage, there is also a fight playing out over the vetting process here for some of these nominees. Tell us about this.
Right. Typically, through the transition process, there are memorandums of understanding that are signed between the transition team of the incoming presidential administration and the GSA in Washington, D.C., which opens up not only a pipeline of money to go to the transition so they can fund offices and they can essentially stand up a transition operation. But the other big part is ultimately FBI background checks and security clearances. And the Trump transition team right now, 3 weeks after his election, is still foregoing using the resources of the FBI background checks, which not only is of concern to senators up on Capitol Hill that are going to be the ones voting to confirm, but also there's questions like Pete Hegseth. He was named the Pentagon nominee, but it was in the days that followed that sexual assault allegation that came out from a Monterey police department in Colorado or in California. So this is where some of the concerns are about what the FBI may have on some of these individuals in their file that the Trump transition team doesn't know about, and senators up on Capitol Hill don't either.
Yvonne, our viewers may remember something called Project 2025, something that the president had disavowed, the president-elect, I should say, had disavowed, but it's come into play a little bit here. Remind us what that is and what the connection is now, what we're seeing play out.
Right. It was a 900-page book that was essentially a template for not only the what would be a Trump transition, but also a second Trump White House. And it was 900 pages that was authored by a litany of former Trump administration officials. And when it came out, Donald Trump tried to distance himself because polling suggested that Americans were not too fond of some of the policy proposals inside of it. And yet many of these were key allies of his. Well, fast forward here since his election, a great many of those very authors who were involved in that project are coming in to work in his administration. The latest one, on Friday night, he tapped Russ Vought, who is going to be his OMB director, who is one of those key authors. It's talked about the executive use of the presidency. He is going to be brought into the administration. So while Donald Trump is campaigning, try to distance himself from the project, he's doing exactly what a lot of Democrats said would likely happen, and that is he's utilizing not only the work that they produced, but also those personnel individuals that were behind the project for his next administration.
And is there a concern moving forward? Like, what if this were to be followed to an extent, what could happen next?
I think that this is where, for Donald Trump has even said himself, is that in his first administration, they felt like they ultimately were not able to work as efficiently because they were new to Washington. They brought in a lot of newcomers, a lot of new voices. And the reason why Project 2025 could be so useful to him and his administration is that it is an outline of how each department and federal government agency can be more efficiently run. Essentially, it's an outline about how they can make use of their next 4 years in office more efficiently. And that is why, for Donald Trump, it could be very beneficial because it is an exact kind of an agenda of how they can go and actually get the